Hey guys, today I have a review of the new John Meadows program, Unity. He designed this one together with Tate. So I was obviously pretty excited for this program. If you guys are watching this channel, you know who John Meadows and Tate are. They're some of my most important mentors in the industry. They both got their start at Westside Barbell. Dave went on to become one of the most influential strength athletes, I think, in the world, and John arguably one of the most influential bodybuilders and bodybuilding coaches in the world. And for good reason. They really know their stuff, and they really are great guys, and I've worked with both of them personally, and I'm extremely grateful to them for their help. That said, I'm going to try and be very unbiased in this review. Bottom line up front, though, I'm extraordinarily impressed. This is one of the best out-of-the-box programs I have ever seen, and I think it'll work very, very well for anyone who's in the off-season. I would not recommend it for anyone who is in meet prep or show prep, and I'll talk about why a little bit later in the interview or review. So first, I want to give a big overview of what the program is like. If you're familiar with any of John's other programs, it's going to be pretty similar. The beginning is a lot of useful information related to, the ins and outs of training and the scientific backing behind his methods. He gives you information on recovery, information on setting up your different exercises if you're using accommodating resistance, all that sort of good stuff. It also lays out the general split or microcycle of the program. So the split is a standard conjugate one where you have what they call a dynamic effort lower body, dynamic effort upper body, and then max effort upper body, max effort lower body. They added a fifth day for back and biceps, which I think is a great idea for a bodybuilding or power building program. And as I'll discuss more a little bit later, I would say that the dynamic effort days are not really this traditional dynamic effort. They're more volume days. And again, I think that's a really good change because when you are training for both sports at the same time, I think that dynamic effort is a little bit less important because it's very specific to strength and less specific to bodybuilding. So volume is a good mix of the two. The macro cycle, or mesocycle, I guess, sorry. The mesocycle of the program, it's 9 weeks long, and it's divided into three-week blocks. There's a lot of overlap between the blocks, which is good, in my opinion, because it creates a natural transition. I do think that the first block starts off too easy. I think that if you're an experienced trainer, which you should be if you're running this program, the first block is going to be too easy unless you're coming off a really hard training cycle with no deload. And so I would probably recommend for most people skipping that. If you think you're a little bit out of your league, you don't have a lot of experience with strength training or with bodybuilding, then by all means, go ahead and do block one. When you look at the individual workouts, they're designed more or less similar to your typical Westside style workouts. So on your dynamic effort days, the main exercise of each day is either a squat or a bench press. And you'll be performing those for multiple sets of low reps at various percentages of your 1 rep max. Now, again, in block one, I think these percentages are too low, and I think the number of sets are too high. I think that if you were to perform the given number of sets, you would be there all day, and I don't think they would be doing much for you because the percentages are so low. I think this is probably something that Dave brought over from his equipped lifting background. And if you're an experienced equipped lifter, you're going to be strong enough that those percentages are probably appropriate. But if you're a raw lifter or you don't have quite as much experience as Dave, I think the percentages and the sets and rep schemes that they use in blocks 2 and 3 are probably a little bit better. The rest of the program is designed like a traditional John Meadows program. But one of the things I like is that he's been a lot more intentional with the movements that he chooses. So the movements are really good ones that are both going to stimulate muscle growth and allow you to attack your weak points in different ranges of motion for the squat and the bench press. Like most of John's programs, he begins the dynamic days with a hamstring curl movement, which is different than the Westside style. And in several of the training sessions, you'll also begin with a type of warm-up circuit. I really love this idea. If you watch the presentation I did at Kabuki EDU Week, that's one method that I talked about incorporating in my own power building methods that I find extremely beneficial because it's a great way to kind of introduce your body to the heavier loads that you'll be using in a power building program, while at the same time not fatiguing yourself so much that you can't give 100% effort to those. The back and biceps day is very straightforward. It's a traditional bodybuilding day. And if you've used any of John's programs, or honestly any other bodybuilding programs, you'll be very familiar with those. Again, it is designed well. It's very laid out very clearly, so you'll know exactly what you're doing. There's not a lot of ambiguity there. The maximum effort days, I think, are where I have the biggest problem. With a traditional, Westside method, you're working up to somewhere between a 1 and 5 rep max on a different movement, and you'll rotate movements out according to probably what your coach says, or, some people repeat a movement for 2 or 3 weeks until they stall. Some people will switch the movement every week. There's a lot of different methods to go about it. In this particular one, there's a little bit of a mishmash, and that's part of what I don't like. In block 1, again, I think you're starting with percentages that are too low to really be effective. For a maximum effort type movement for strength. For bodybuilding, they're probably okay, and I do like the movement selection in block 1. However, then I think there's too much volume on that day in terms of accessory exercises. I think that if you're truly giving maximal effort on those lifts for lower body and upper body, which are usually squat variation and bench variation, you're going to be too wiped out to give sufficient effort to the rest of the day, because there's a lot of volume in there, which you won't find on a Westside day. There's less volume. It's more moderate. The other thing to note in block 1 the other thing to note about the max effort days is you usually have speed pulls as well after your max effort lower body day. So you can imagine you're doing a max effort squat variation, then you're doing speed pulls, and then you have a whole lot of bodybuilding volume. You're going to be pretty wiped out. So I don't love that. My bigger problem is then in blocks 2 and 3. For a significant number of the 9 weeks, the guys have you doing front squats as a max effort movement for legs. I don't like that at all. I think that if you're really pushing, you're not going to be able to hold a front squat rack position enough to give sufficient effort to prepare yourself for heavy back squat load, and you're not going to be able to get sufficient stimulus for quad growth with those types of rep ranges. I think with power building specifically, you have to be extremely intentional about your core lifts, because you're training for such different pursuits. With powerlifting, you're really concerned about demonstrating strength, and with bodybuilding, you're concerned about building muscle, and as a result, there's fairly little overlap between the movements. So if it were me, I would try and keep it simple, and I would stick with a very close variation of your squat, maybe a safety bar squat, and then, if you had a bias one way or the other, you could be a little bit more specific. So if your primary focus is powerlifting, well, then maybe you're going to do a competition squat, or if your primary focus is bodybuilding, maybe that's going to be a hack squat, but I wouldn't ever choose a front squat. The pressing movement max effort variations are a little bit better. I think those are probably okay. If I were to give a general recommendation, I would say with the maximum effort movement specifically, swap those out according to what your body needs to grow and according to what your goals are. I think with that very small change, you can make the program overall much more effective. The biggest issue I have with the maximum effort days is that on the very last week of the program, the guys have you working up to sets of multiple reps with 95% of your competition max. I'm sorry, but I think that's a very, very bad idea. If you haven't been training those lifts at high intensities, and I think the highest intensity that the dynamic effort days go is at 80% of your 1 rep max, and all of a sudden you're going to throw 95% for reps, that's asking for injury or failure. I think that's a terrible idea. I would not do that week 9. I would substitute with something else, and then if you wanted to test your 1 rep max, I would then run a very short, 3 to 6 week peaking block to do so, where you can familiarize yourself with the heavy loads. But otherwise, I think it's a terrible idea. That's my biggest grievance with the program, is that week 9 max effort. I know it's very specific, but I think it's a very, very bad one. Other than that, I think the program is very well designed. I think that it's very much worth the money, and I highly recommend it. I do have affiliation with both the guys, but I have no stake in this. I'm not getting any kickbacks for John's program. The link is below. As far as I know, all the money goes to him. Maybe he's split with Dave. I don't know. But I do recommend you purchase this if power building is something you're interested in. At the very least, you'll learn a lot. The 2 changes that I would make, either skip block 1 or fiddle with the percentages on the dynamic effort and max effort days for that block, and then alter the maximum effort movements according to your goals in your body and you know what you need to grow, so that you're not maxing out on new movements in week 9, so that you're not, you know, kind of wasting effort on heavy front squats if you can't hold that position, etc. I think with those 2 changes, this is a really killer program. So if you guys have checked it out and have your own thoughts, please post them in the comments below. If I missed something, you know, and I got something wrong here, again, just please correct me. I did read the whole thing pretty carefully, but it's long, as all of John's programs are, very detailed, and so it's very possible I just, you know, my eyes glazed over and I glossed over something. So if that's the case, again, call me out on it. But I do recommend this program. I hope you give it a shot, and I hope you let me know what you think.